Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly Power Lounge. This is your place to hear authentic conversations from those who have power to share. My name is Amy Vaughn, and I am the owner and Chief Empowerment Officer at Together Digital, a diverse and collaborative community of women who work in digital and choose to share their knowledge, power, and connection. You can join the movement at togetherindigital.com. And today we're diving into a conversation that goes beyond comfortable platitudes and into the real work of inclusive leadership. I am thrilled to welcome Sheryl Daija, founder and CEO of Bridge, a leader who is turning inclusion from a buzzword into a strategic business driver. I had the pleasure of meeting Sheryl at last year's Content Marketing World. Yes, where she was on stage and spoke and was very, very impressed with the work that you're doing. And like you said, going beyond the platitudes is so important. Sheryl's journey began in a apartheid area in South Africa, an experience that profoundly shaped her lifelong commitment to equality and doing the uncomfortable work that real progress demands. Now she is based in what I hope is sunny San Diego, because I'm in freezing Cincinnati, Ohio, where she is leading Bridge, the independent global trade organization that is transforming how marketing, media, and technology industries approach inclusion. Her leadership at Bridge created IMAX, the Inclusive Marketing Advantage Index, the first operating system that enables executives to actually measure the mature in inclusion across their business to unlock trust, relevance, and competitive advantage. What sets Sheryl apart isn't just her powerful origin story or her impressive credentials as thought leadership and strategist. It's her refusal to accept surface level DEI conversations. We are here for that. So she is here to talk about operationalizing inclusion, stretching beyond our comfort zones, and understanding that true leadership requires clarity, courage, and conviction. Welcome to the Power Lounge, Sheryl.
Thank you so much for having me, Amy. I appreciate it. That was quite the introduction.
I know, right?
I hope to be able to live up to it.
You absolutely will. You absolutely will. So your story starts in South Africa. How did that experience shape not just your commitment to equality, as I stated in the intro, but specifically your approach to making inclusion a measurable business strategy rather than a moral imperative?
Yeah. So, certainly interesting times right now, and the parallels, obviously, between South Africa are kind of stark and scary. But I did grow up under the apartheid regime in South Africa, and at a very early age, I kind of recognized what it meant to live at the expense of an entire nation. Obviously, we were, I don't think privilege quite captures how we lived. And, that spurred my personal commitment to social justice. It was not easy. I was very young. I mean, I was still at school. And it was not easy to be an activist, honestly, in South Africa. And people would be people would disappear. They would disappear people a lot. And so, you had to find ways, right, to change, to make change, and to understand really, kind of the complexity of what was going on in that time. I had the privilege of leaving South Africa because I did not want to live under those conditions. And I did not realize when I left what a privilege it was that I was able to leave, right? Only kind of after doing my own work did I, really understand the privilege of being able to leave. And I thought I'd come to this country and see something very different. And obviously it was different. It was not the law of the land. When I arrived, segregation was, kind of over. But there's obviously been a lot of, there continues to be a lot of inequity and inequality in this country. Especially now. So that coupled, I think, with the fact that I am part of a multiracial family and I've chosen to see the world through my son's eyes, has really challenged me to understand what the way that we can do this work and be successful at doing the work. And I believe that the way that we can do the work and be successful at doing the work is not is not grounding it in the moral imperative. It's grounding it in the business imperative. At the end of the day, companies need to make money. They're focused on growth. I believe inclusion is transformational for that growth. And so, so that kind of gives us a business grounding, to drive inclusion as a way, as a capability, right? And operationalizing it across the business, because the opportunity is huge. And so if we can, change the narrative around it, we can kind of get back to the work at hand, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand what you're saying exactly, because we can say so much about the platitudes, and there's a lot of people who've kind of ridden that coattails of like performative allyship and things like that. But when you're talking to business, it's not that personal endeavor. It's like, what are the business cases? What are the business needs or objectives? And it feels kind of cold and inhuman, but at the same time, such as business in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, listen, I don't want to pretend that I don't believe it's a moral imperative, because I absolutely do.
100%.
I just don't think that the moral imperative always wins. And in order for it to become a practice within organizations, we have to apply the same rigor to it as we would to any other practice that we do. And so I think that's our opportunity and advantage, is how do we, at the end of the day, for me, it's the work gets done. Whether it's a moral or business side, I don't really care. I just want to make sure that the work gets done, because the end result, right, is the same thing. So, yeah.
Winning all around in that case. So you said that only real progress happens when we get stretched beyond our comfort. Talking in a business sense, talking about executives, that can be a little bit of a challenge. So what does that work, that uncomfortable stretch, actually look like in practice? And why do so many leaders kind of stop short of it?
Yeah. I think for me, uncomfortable stretch is when you change where power and money actually move, not just language, right? And so certainly, the language of DEI has been attacked. I've often said you can call it purple butterfly. It doesn't matter as long as the work gets done, right? So we have to really think about how do we change where the power and the money move, right? Not just the language. So that's kind of the first thing. And when I was looking at the questions, obviously I was thinking, it was interesting because my work experience, right? I was the chief strategy officer at the MMA, which was the Mobile Marketing Association. And I remember so vividly how, consumers had already moved to mobile, but brands kept on investing in what fit their kind of legacy models, right? What was in their marketing mix models. It felt safer. No one got fired, right, for sticking with what they knew. And so it was, even though it was incredibly frustrating for us, because we were like, all of your consumers are over here. Why are you spending money over there? It took, research and ROI and, advertising effectiveness studies and all of those things, right? That kind of was applying the rigor, right, to that moment and to that business. It wasn't enough that the consumers were where they were. And so, I think that fundamentally CEOs and brands are kind of tried and true. And so we have to figure out how do we break through with that same kind of rigor, right? The thing that I will say, in the same way that consumers were all on mobile devices, I mean, we know, despite the attempts or despite the wish that this wasn't the case, the demographics are shifting, markets are shifting, and I do think that it's going to be really important for companies to understand and start internalizing that, because they will fade into irrelevance if they don't. I mean, I think that's the cautionary tale, right? So, so it's really about how can you start to think about, readying your organization to be ready for what the future is going to hold. Despite what the politics say, despite everything else, there's just a reality. We know that, right? I mean, we see that Gen Z is the most multiracial. I mean, I don't have to tell you, right? Most multiracial generation of our time, et cetera, et cetera. That is a reality. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and there's just a lot to like the organizational, like there's a lot to organizational change and change in general that like
Yeah,
definitely stop people in their tracks when it's like, you'll hear, we've always done it this way. And when you ask to move money or change systems, it feels big and it feels scary. And so
right.
that definitely can get you stuck. But I think, like you're saying, the data is truly what's going to help get them out of that rut and maybe that analysis paralysis or fear of making actionable change. And I think as consumers too, it's been really interesting to see how we are trying to choose differently and how and where and when we spend our money. So that drives it even
Exactly.
further. It's not enough for you to just like post something about Facebook and bitch about it. You need to actually like put your money where your mouth is too. And then that will signal to the higher ups that, there's got to be some changes there as
Yeah,
well. Have you kind of
yeah.
seen that in like any particular cases where that's been effective? I mean, I know sometimes we do like today is supposed to be a blackout day. We were just talking about that before we hopped on here. Are movements like this actually moving the needle and getting recognition at the top?
I mean, I do think so, right? We've seen that, companies that had this, kind of extreme overcorrection at the beginning of this new kind of administration, that their bottom line has been significantly impacted, right? I mean, CEOs are in a difficult position right now, but I genuinely believe that if you know what your values are and you abide by those values and you execute against those values, then and you are consistent with what your internal values are with your external communications, then you're kind of in a pretty good spot to kind of continue to do this work, and move things forward. Power does not sit only at the top, right? Power sits with each and every one of us. And I do think that we are at the beginning of seeing the impact of that power on the economy, and on specific ways that people are choosing to spend their money. I do think that it's actually kind of maybe even at this inflection point, right? Of, if you listen to, I don't know if you listen to Scott Galloway, but if you listen to, the way Scott talks, this is the inflection point of when that is going to drive,
Yeah.
I think, pretty significant change. Yeah.
I hope so. Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about IMAX. So bringing it back to like the work that's being done internally, the Inclusive Marketing Advantage Index. For our members
Yeah.
who are, have tried maybe or are tired of like inclusion being treated as this nice to have thing, how does IMAX fundamentally change the conversation in the C-suite? Because there's a lot of frameworks out there. There's a lot of ways to come at this. How is
Yeah.
this different?
Yeah. So, I have a marketing background. So for me, the thing that, as we were kind of thinking about what is our mission, which is really about how do you operationalize inclusion as a business practice, we've brought in the learnings. As I said, we need to apply the same rigor to inclusion as we do for everything else that we're doing. And so we brought in a lot of the learnings from our business experience into IMAX. And you kind of you treasure what you measure. We have a board member, Ian, who always says that, right?
Yeah.
And it's actually not that you measure what you treasure. You really should treasure what you kind of you can measure, right? And so the biggest opportunity is how do we actually turn inclusion into a metric, into a brand metric, and into something that is measurable. And so what we wanted to do with IMAX, and we actually collaborated with an academy team from a professor of marketing from Emory University, the University of Georgia, and Indiana University, was to understand what are the practices that contribute to building more equity and inclusion in the marketplace, right? We've obviously had a lot of focus in the workplace when it comes to DEI efforts or inclusion efforts. And we really wanted to say, okay, the workplace is foundational to marketplace impact. What are those practices within the marketplace that can drive growth? How do we turn inclusion into a growth driver, and how do we actually start to measure it? So IMAX is actually part of a broader system for inclusive growth that we have been now talking about, because we want to bring consistent language and process and approach to this work, and kind of take away the philosophical conversation, but really, grounded in what we believe, right, is transformational for growth. And there are actually 4 components. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but just to give you maybe kind of high level understanding of what we think about when we think about inclusive growth. One is, how do you mitigate risk in this time? We obviously have to think about that. I wish it wasn't part of the work that we're doing, but it is. The second is, how do you unlock growth? And that's really about IMAX. The third is, how do you then build the capability within your organization and make inclusion an enterprise-wide capability? And then the fourth, which is more of an internal thing for us, is how do we start to foster industry alignment? So, where we are right now is that companies are really under significant pressure, right, to grow in a market that's very fragmented. But it's also skeptical, and people are watching really closely, right? Yeah. So you have consumers that are kind of more complicated and more diverse. You've got investors that are more discerning, and you've got regulators that are more active. So every decision, from the culture you build to how your brand shows up, really does signal what your company stands for, right? And so IMAX is a framework of 150 plus business practices across the organization that really helps leaders, CEOs, CFOs, CMOs, inclusion leaders, culture leaders, to turn inclusion into a competitive advantage by building inclusion as a capability. And so that's really what our focus has been. And it's both a framework and it's also a maturity model, right? Marketers are very used to maturity models. So we figured if we can start to give and equip individuals and companies with the way to actually measure your inclusion maturity and tie that maturity to business outcomes, then you can understand what are the practices that are going to contribute to building your brand equity, strengthening performance, and ultimately reducing risk in this moment. So we're pretty excited about IMAX. We're starting to roll it out now, but it really is the first time that you can start to measure inclusion as a brand metric, if you will.
That's really smart. I love it.
Thank you.
Love it. So a lot of our members are navigating companies and organizations where DEI initiatives feel either performative or pretty much just stalled out. What is the difference between companies that successfully operationalize inclusion using things like your IMAX framework versus those who kind of are stuck in that surface level conversation still, or again, have just chosen to go silent on it, which feels like a lot of folks?
So, I will say that that there are a lot of companies that have chosen to go silent, but not stop the work. Which, for me, again, I wish they were loud and proud about doing the work, but doing the work is more important. And so, trying to stay under the radar, trying to do the right thing, continuing to do the right thing, so that they can focus on their business without attacks is understandable, right, in this moment. And so I do think that I do think there are more companies that are actually doing the work versus having completely, walked away from it. How they're doing it, I think, is really, kind of the question, right? So for me, the difference is growth. Companies that move beyond performative inclusion and really integrate it into how they build their brand, how they build their products, their customer relationships, that drive performance, will kind of bring longevity to the practice of inclusion, and make it, authentic, right? And also sustainable. I mean, if you look at companies like Elf Beauty or Sephora, right? They're experiencing double-digit growth as a result of their inclusion efforts, not because they're doing performative inclusion, but because their inclusion efforts are integrated, and they're both intentional and authentic, right? And I love actually when I kind of talk about this, it always kind of reminds me of one of our CMOs who are on the board, Joy Allen Altamira, and she says that she said at our Bridge 25 retreat last year, she said, you need to build with culture, not for culture.
Okay.
Yeah,
I love that.
And I think I mean, it's obvious, right? But the nuance is incredibly powerful and game changing, I think, for companies when you really understand what that means. So, that allows us to kind of go, move away from, well, we need diverse slates, and not that we
Yeah.
don't. We need diverse slates of, when we hire, or we need to get to percentages. Start to think about how do you develop with culture, not for culture. And that means that you have to have that culture internally integrated into your organization, right? And that means that you need to have diversity on your teams.
Yep.
But not because we think that it's a good moral imperative, but it's because it's just smart business, right? I mean, it's just smart business. If you're going after a community, make sure that your teams represent the community that you're looking to serve, because they know that community better than you do if you're not part of it, right?
Yep.
So I do think that the big difference is growth, and an understanding of what it means to build with culture, not for culture, and what does that mean? And that is really kind of, I feel like I repeat myself a lot, but that's why we believe that you need to operationalize inclusion. If when I talk to companies right now, my message to them is, in order to actually reduce your vulnerabilities, do more. Don't do less. You know what I mean? Because if it's part of your business and it's totally, integrated, people can't find it, right? If they're looking for it, because it's fundamental to your business growth. And by the way, I would imagine that growth is the most important thing. So figure out how you can tie that inclusion to your business outcomes.
Love it. And it's such a subtle but brilliant mindset shift. You're right. The for culture versus with culture, for maintaining relevance, for finding community, which is all things that brands have wanted to do, but it's always felt like it's been force feeding, right? Because they're doing it for versus with. And there's, even from a marketing standpoint, that's such a smart, obviously spoken well by a CMO.
Exactly. I love Joy, but it really, the nuance is just so incredibly simple, yet very, very powerful. So
absolutely. So you work across marketing, media, and technology industries that often claim to value diversity but struggle with that meaningful change. What patterns have you observed that keep these industries moving beyond intentions and actual outcomes? I think this kind of dovetails nicely off of what we were just talking about, but any other builds that you have?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's great to have good intentions, right? And I do think that a lot of companies, certainly after the murder of George Floyd, their intentions were in the right place. Sure. But good intentions don't always drive successful implementation, right? And unfortunately, most times, as we saw and have seen, they end up with performative activities that are not sustainable or scalable, right? And so to really do inclusion work well and to tap into the opportunity, by the way, for growth, it's going to require a behavioral change, right? I mean, right? All the most successful things ultimately require you to change some form of behavior, right? And I think a recognition that inclusion is a competitive advantage for long-term growth. And, back to what we were saying, not just a moral imperative, right? Yeah. So there has to be that realization and that awareness and that consciousness that is brought to inclusion. And there has to be that change in behavior. It's not about politics. It's not about what you believe. It's not about policy. It's about where is the opportunity, and understanding that inclusion can be a huge competitive advantage. And then how do you change, how do you prepare your organization for that change in behavior so you can start to embed inclusion in, your product development, right? I mean, I think there are so many gaps, right, from a product development perspective. And we've seen when inclusion is embedded in product development and you see yourself in the brand, right, how that just builds incredible, brand equity and loyalty. And I won't get into it, but we actually did some research last year about the impact of inclusion on purchase intent, and it was on par with pricing strategies. So it was a 3x impact, and it was literally on par with pricing strategies and kind of like feature benefit strategies. So when you start to kind of, I think that's part of what's been missing in the industry, and that's our, kind of responsibility, is to show the impact that it has on purchase intent, to
I
show
love
the
it.
impact that it has on engagement, and those are the maybe the rigor that has been missing in this work, and obviously we hope to bring it, but you have to move beyond good intentions, right?
Great.
You have to
Yeah.
change behavior. Yeah,
It's these little baby steps, but it's like all
right.
significant, meaningful steps too. So I think I'm honestly excited about it. I'm happy to be out of the performative era of DEI for all the changes in administration and how like it just kind of felt like it was like a sinking ship. I actually think it's a little bit more of a dark horse. I think it's got its chance to come back,
Yeah.
and I think it's going to be grounded in a lot of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, Amy, I think you make such a good point. And it's something that I have said before, which is let's just set aside the politics for the moment, because it kind of doesn't matter. Every single practice always evolves. I mean, when you talk to marketers all the time, ask CMOs how many times they reorg in a year, right? I mean, they can go through 3 or 4 reorgs in one
Yeah.
year. It is an evolution. You figure out what works and what doesn't, and then you double down and you prioritize what's working and you change what isn't. I think that despite the politics, DEI practices, inclusion practices, again, whatever you want to call them, was at the point where they would have organically started to evolve anyway. And just by the way, we're not saying anything that most DEI leaders haven't said in their organizations. And I would say skilled DEI leaders haven't been saying that it's attached to performance and it's attached to business outcomes. I think that there was not necessarily that behavior change. So everyone kind of was so stuck on the fact that there was this moral imperative and we needed to get X percentage of people. And, the focus was there. The skilled DEI leaders, though, were always have always known that this is about
Right.
potential growth. We just now have the opportunity to drive that message home in a stronger way. And I think CEOs that are open to hearing it are going to be the ones that are most successful kind of in the future. So, yeah.
So I'm going to jump on one of my soapboxes here for just a second. I don't know how
Please.
much this is happening anymore, but
Yeah.
a lot of our members, myself included, have often been asked to lead inclusion efforts on top of their regular roles within companies. And this is where I get a little chapped, because it's like, we didn't create the problem, but you're going to assign us to do more work for free to address and fix the problem that wasn't our creation. So how do you advise professionals who maybe aren't at the table at leadership, who want to drive some meaningful change, do so without becoming basically unpaid DEI labor? Because it's a real thing,
Yeah.
and it makes me
It
so
is.
mad.
It is a real thing, and it's the same as, right, like racism is not a black issue, right?
Right.
It's not black
It's
people
not.
to fix. It's
Yeah.
for it's for white people to fix.
Uh-huh.
And it's kind of the same thing, right? And I think what we saw after the murder of George Floyd was, okay, well, you're a woman or you're a person of color and you're doing marketing. Why don't you just start do DEI? And
Yes.
it kind of misses the point, right? You don't. DEI are very skilled professionals that come at the work with a very nuanced lens to the world, and being a woman or a person of color certainly makes you more conscious and aware, but it doesn't make you a DEI leader, right? So I hear you, and I do think that that has been certainly a challenge, right? That being said, I would say that inclusion is everyone's responsibility.
Yes.
And it's actually not the role of women or people of color, or even the DI leaders, again, whatever their titles might be at this moment. They certainly can create the strategy, and they can create the understanding and the education around the opportunity. But at the bottom line is that to do it successfully, it needs to be intentionally, again, as we've said, embedded as core to your role, whatever your role is. Everyone should be asking, how do I use inclusion as a lever to drive growth, to create new markets, and to increase loyalty? The conversation should not be about whose job it is. It should be about how do we tap into this as a huge opportunity and as a lever for growth. And so I think that the way that we solve this is by saying, again, is by not thinking of it as outside of our jobs, but rather as integral to them, right?
Yeah.
And whether you're a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, if you're in marketing, if you're in, if you're in research and insights, if you're in product development, if you're in AI specifically right now, I mean, we should really be talking about how do you put inclusion at the center of your AI, models and development. Everyone should be asking that same question, because that's how, you kind of figure out how do you use it to drive growth. And so we're not there yet, but that's the hope. And I do think that that's how you change the mindset from it being your job to being everyone's job.
Everybody's job. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Love that answer. So the answer, ladies, is no. We just need systems, and inclusion's everyone's job.
Exactly. Yeah. You obviously, and again, it's like, okay, but then, I'm happy to do it, but it's going to be integral to my job and therefore need resources, budget, etc.,
Yes.
so that we can be successful at executing against it, as a driver of growth, not because it feels good. Right.
I mean, I'm just going to vent for a second because I feel like our listeners could relate. Is that like I was a creative director working 60 hours a week with 2 small children at home, and I had such a passion for this. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't. And they were like, we need a logo for the group and it needs to be well designed and we need to get reviews and approvals scheduled. They were making such a big deal of all of this stuff. And I was like, why does any of that actually matter? What matters is the conversations, the concerns that are being brought up in the space that we're creating, like not how pretty the logo is and what the mission vision is and where are the objectives, where are the goals, Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that, when structure doesn't exist, it's hard, you kind of try to find your center, and you do it on the things that are familiar to you, right? So that's kind of like, okay, standard operating procedure. Let's have a mission and vision. Let's have a logo, right? And so you kind of get stuck on the familiar as opposed to, challenging what doesn't exist. So
deeper work. Absolutely. I mean, they spent months on that. I was like, are we going to have a meeting? Are we going to kick this off? Like any day now.
I'm sure. And I'm sure the color was really important too.
I honestly don't even remember what it looked like. I've like blocked it out. But I do remember the conversations and I do remember the opportunities that it had helped, because I didn't even stay, but like the CFO was greatly impressed by the work that we did, the data that we brought, the conversations that we had and held. And they ended up he made it his goal to, reach pay equity for the whole company within 2 years. And he did it.
Amazing.
And then a foundation that would actually help folks that maybe couldn't get into the industry as easily get scholarships out of high school to go to college to study these things. And I mean, just a lot of really great stuff. So it's not all in vain, folks. Don't worry.
It just often I'll be on my soapbox for a second, but often I wonder, what are we really arguing about? This is not that hard, right? It's just not that hard. Everyone deserves equity. Everyone, it's just not that. And by the way, it's just good for business. When you've got $7 trillion of buying power from underrepresented communities, what are we arguing about? Do you want part of it or don't you? Because if you do, then do it, then there's lots of opportunities to get this right, and to tap into that buying power, right? So what are we really arguing about? There's money to be spent. If you want if you want that money, let's talk about how you get it.
I will just answer the question and then ask you it because it goes really nicely into our next question. To me, I think it's fear and potential loss of power, like perceived loss of power. So like when you're talking about, all of these things, how well documented inclusion works, that there are people who will still persist to resist. And what's really holding leadership back? Has anybody actually gotten open and vulnerable with you about what those barriers truly are for them or the rest of the organization that are holding them back?
I don't know. I mean, listen, inclusion is not a zero-sum game, right? I mean, it's just, again, as you have to really believe and change your behavior. And I would hope, if you're a CEO, that you recognize that you cannot lead out of fear. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly we're seeing a lot of that now. It's not getting us anywhere, right? You have to have courage, you have to have conviction, you have to have clarity, and you have to make decisions based on what's best for your brand and the communities that you serve, right? So, yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of excuses, not a lot of substance as to why you wouldn't kind of do it, right? Inclusion has always been about everyone.
Right. That
Certainly,
includes you guys. That includes
you're
everybody.
right. There's a lot of there's a lot of misconceptions out there, which hopefully we can try to, take that narrative back. But, listen, I think that, thinking about like kind of what you said, and maybe what your next question is, or what your question is in terms of what's holding leadership back, and if I always like to say, okay, we can blame everyone else, but what can we do differently, right? So how do we take responsibility to try and help not have them hold back, or how do we help them break those barriers, right? And so I tend to believe that leaders don't necessarily need more belief, right? When you talk to them, they're like, yeah, we do, we know, we believe, we're just not sure, so we've come at it from okay, well, listen, we're going to give some more infrastructure to this, right? And we are going to help you kind of move away from the inertia, and from the fear, and from the fact that maybe there has been an absence of a clear roadmap, right? But at the end of the day, and so we're going to provide you with that infrastructure, right? And that's why we created the System for Inclusive Growth. That's why we created IMAX, because we kind of we're giving solutions to what we've heard as what the barriers are, right? But I think ultimately what leaders need to understand, and that's every leader that is listening, not listening. Maybe your listeners can take it, to these leaders. Is that I believe, genuinely believe, that to break the barriers, we need to move inclusion out of the margins into the mechanics of the business.
Yeah.
And when we do that and we embed it into performance and governance and growth and, all of these opportunities, we start to have a very different conversation. We can move past this fear, which is hard to understand. Maybe it's even just lack of courage at this moment in time, because there are just huge opportunities. And so let's focus on the performance. Let's focus on the growth. We don't even have to have other conversations about it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. All right. So you have built Bridge. It's an independent global organization. Why was independence critical to your mission? And how does it enable you to push the kind of change that that might make some industry players uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's a complicated thing because we're an industry trade organization. So whereas obviously we're independent, but we also serve the global marketing industry. And so we come to the work obviously with a responsibility to ensure that, we understand the challenges and we see clearly, all of the things that are happening. But I do think what it does allow us to do is have a voice in places where employees of organizations might not have that same voice, right? They might have marketing communications guidelines that they have to abide by and respect. They might have, moments that are, just too complicated, right? To unravel. And so I think that as a kind of industry group and as a voice for this work, and certainly as a voice for leaders that are doing this work, it allows us to have some of the more difficult conversations that you might not be able to have if you're, internal to a company. So,
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
All right. For leaders who genuinely want to mature their inclusion practices, but don't even know where to start beyond the traditional training, what's a first operational shift that they could make?
I feel like I'm going to repeat myself.
It's okay. We got to reinforce it. Make sure they
Yeah,
heard it.
I really do. I feel like I'm going to repeat myself, but I would say stop thinking of inclusion as a philosophy or even as optional, and start thinking about it as a competitive capability for growth.
Yep.
Like you have to start,
Very.
right? If you really are genuinely interested in inclusion, you've got to change your behavior. You've got to start. You've got to change how you're thinking about it, and don't get caught up in the philosophy or the politics of it, and really start thinking about it as a competitive capability.
And that can be such a distraction. You're so right, because it strips away all the BS and all of the drama and all of the polarization and just brings it back
the
to
noise,
what it's supposed to be about. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Again, it bears repeating, so don't even worry about it. We'll keep saying it until they hear us and do it.
I feel like I'm, kind of beating a drum, but it as you say, it bears repeating because it is the thing. It's just such a huge opportunity. I just wish, I wish I could talk to every CEO of every Fortune 500 company and just say to them, you're thinking about this wrong. It's just a huge opportunity. And, let's just give it a shot, right? Just think about it differently.
We need to find a way to go the marketer route and just give them a little FOMO.
Yeah, exactly.
Find a way to create some inclusion FOMO. All right. My last question before we move on to the power round is looking at marketing, media, and tech industries today. What gives you hope and what keeps you up at night about where we're headed with inclusion?
This is a really difficult question because I am actually an eternal optimist, but I have struggled to see hope in the lack of courageous leadership that we're seeing, and so I'm going to choose to focus on the opportunity to change the conversation and not necessarily focus on whether or not there's hope or no hope, right? Because I believe that there's enough people out there that believe in this and that we can, again, I'm an eternal optimist that we can change the conversation and that this too shall pass. I think also, what keeps me up at night probably is more than what, is a bigger focus for me than obviously what gives me hope, because what keeps me up at night spurs our work, right? And it allows us to keep, thinking and iterating and making sure that we've got the right answers. But I would say a few things. Number one is, how do we help leaders understand that a commitment to values is a good thing, right? It's just a good thing, right? It's good business. It's good for your employees. It's good for your consumers. It's just a good thing, right? Like, you need to really internalize who you are and your values, because that allows you to, in hard and difficult moments, which we are surely in, it allows you to communicate and it allows you to stand by, who you are and and what you believe in, despite, right, what might kind of come out from it, right? In the long term, it's going to be the thing that really grounds companies. So, I kind of think about how do we help them. I think that the thing is, how do we kind of move companies away from this naivete that inclusion is optional and that there aren't consequences without it, because they are, and we've seen what those consequences are. And so start to think about how do you do it right, as opposed to kind of walking away from it, right? So those are the kind of things. The other piece I was thinking a lot, and I've been thinking a lot about this, is and this really does keep me up at night, is this, just incredible urgency and almost, kind of insane urge to rush to build AI models without confronting the systemic biases that exist. And I believe that we are significantly underestimating the reputational risk of doing this. I think that there is a huge potential risk to reputation for brands by rushing and kind of using AI to do just about everything, right? Whether it's hiring, whether it is doing creating ads. I mean, we know that human error, right, has allowed some pretty egregious mistakes from a marketing perspective. We've seen a lot of them. So now we're kind of relying on a model that we know is intrinsically has intrinsic systemic biases to make those decisions for us. And I genuinely believe that we are rushing without being intentional and conscious and aware of the potential reputational risks that are, I think, inevitable if we continue to do that. So I know that we're kind of thinking about how do we even start maybe an inclusive AI development committee. I hear too much about what AI can do for companies and not enough about how we're going to build those models. And so I think we should all be very afraid that we're rushing into building these models. And I would say that we should pause and understand it and really, think about it more pragmatically. There's not an urgency, right? Like we're creating, kind of our own timeline on this. There's, yes, there is huge opportunity in AI. It's transformational, but we've seen specifically, right, in the media and marketing industry, when we have built structure too fast, the problems that it has created afterwards. And so we really have an opportunity to kind of go, okay, breathe, pause, let's think about it.
Agreed.
So,
I hear you.
I don't know if that answered your question, but
yes, it did. It was wonderful. Thank you. And I feel you on both of those fronts. All right. We've got our power round questions. If anybody from the live listening audience wants to jump into the chat and leave a question, you absolutely can. If not, we'll go through these and then we'll get you all back to the rest of your day. What is the most uncomfortable conversation you've had that led to a big breakthrough?
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about that, right? I mean, it's a great question, by the way, and I appreciated the question. And I was thinking a lot about that, and so I'm going to share a story, and I would say that it's not necessarily maybe the kind of traditional sense of conversation, but it's still communication. So I kind of figured that I had a little leeway in how I answered this. But I will say that it was a month after we launched Bridge. So we launched Bridge in April of 2022, and it was in May of 2022. And I'm not sure if your listeners will remember this, or if you will. And I'm not picking on the brand. I'm just sharing a story. But it was when Walmart launched their Juneteenth ice cream.
Oh, I remember if I said that, yeah.
Okay, so Walmart launched a Juneteenth ice cream, again, good intentions, right?
Sure.
To honor Juneteenth, obviously, not great execution.
Yeah.
But, it was a real kind of David and Goliath moment for us because we decided to write an open letter to Walmart. And as with everything that we do, we come at this from how can we help you, right? We're not looking to name and shame. This is hard work, right? People are going to make mistakes, but we are looking to help, right? And so these are the things. So, we wrote an open letter and the approach was, here's how we can help you kind of rethink this type of activity, because if you think about it, and again, I'm not picking on Walmart, but I think it's such a huge opportunity for learning, because if you think about how many people that product, from product development all the way to the fact that it ended up on the shelves, how many people saw that, right? That's an infrastructure challenge, right? It's not a bad intentions challenge. Sure. It's a fact that there is an infrastructure, there's a gap, right? There's a gap somewhere, right? So we wrote this open letter. It got picked up by the Associated Press. I think we ended up getting like 1 billion impressions. By the way, we've never got that since then with any of our
Come on, Walmart, give us more ice cream.
But we literally got like this, 1 billion impressions. It really kind of opened up the opportunity for us to have these kinds of conversations. We did not anticipate it. Walmart ultimately did take the ice cream off their shelves. We don't take credit for that because there was incredible activity on social media that really, I think spurred that action. Hopefully we get maybe we get a tiny little bit of credit. But at the end of the day, what it did was it allowed us to kind of be courageous in those moments. Could we have done it behind the scenes? Absolutely, which we now have made some decisions when things like this happen. We actually do reach out. we've helped a lot of brands now behind the
That's right.
scenes when
That's
things
really smart.
happen, because that's who we want to be. We want to
Yeah.
be an organization that is ready to help when,
Right.
because we
And
know
you have to earn
mistakes
their
are going to be
trust.
made,
Yeah, and
right?
putting them on blast won't earn that trust right away.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, so I apologize to Walmart that we did the open letter and we didn't kind of come to behind the
Yeah.
scenes, but it was kind of,
It was already
it
out
did
there, right?
lead to a breakthrough. We learned a lot also, because, we were very excited about our opportunity to do this, but we also didn't take into account the fact that some of our members worked with Walmart, right? And
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's not that they disagreed necessarily with the position, but probably we should have done a better job at just giving them a heads up.
Live and
So
learn. Live
so
and
we
learn.
so we
You go,
learn
Cheryl.
from our own, we
That's
learn from
right.
our own
That's how we
uncomfortable
grow.
conversation. And that's how we grow, and that's how we've kind of
Yeah.
matured ourselves, right? We were
Right.
1 month old doing this kind of crazy, as I said, David and Goliath moment.
Uh-huh.
But it was important for, I think, everyone, right?
Yeah.
Because it was a teaching moment, it was a learning moment. It was a time when we could have those conversations, and I just wish we could
Yeah.
like have those conversations now, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Agreed. Love it.
yeah.
All right, finish this sentence. Real inclusion feels like,
Intentionally valuing all people for their differences.
love it. That's a great
And
answer.
I would put all in capital, like
Yeah.
all.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
We'll do that on the subtitles. All caps.
Yes,
Noted.
all caps. Intentionally valuing all people for
Yes.
their differences. Yeah.
Love that. What is one leadership myth about diversity and inclusion that needs to die?
That it's not mutually exclusive from meritocracy.
Ooh, yeah. Dig it. Dig it. Oh, this has been so fantastic, Cheryl. Thank you so much. You've brought a lot of clarity, courage, and candor to the conversation. I love your commitment to moving beyond the comfortable conversations and showing real, measurable, actual change and inclusion can actually be what moves the needle for not just consumers, but also the industry needs and business needs. So for everyone listening, I encourage you to connect with Cheryl on LinkedIn and learn more about Bridge and the IMAX Index. This is the kind of work that transforms not just organizations, but entire industries. What were you going to say, Cheryl?
No, I said, please, everyone should connect. And
Yeah.
I'm just, I'm very kind of grateful for the opportunity to talk about this work. As you can see, I get a little animated
Love
about it, but I'm really passionate and I just
Yes.
genuinely believe in what we're doing. So
Me
I
too.
appreciate the
Yeah.
opportunity to be able
And
to
you bring
talk
all
about
that
it.
passion. And you need it. You need the optimism. You need the passion because it's not easy work. So
Yeah,
kudos to you.
we're not going away, and we're going to continue to drive against this in the best possible way. Supporting companies, bringing solutions, and doing it so that, as I say, we can respect everyone for their differences.
Absolutely. Yep. And to our listeners in our Together Digital community, if today's conversation resonated with you, remember we're here to support your growth and leadership. Whether you're working to drive inclusion in your organization or just stretch beyond your own comfort zone, you're not alone in the work that you're doing. You have a tremendous community of women right behind you. You can find them on Slack. You can find them at our events. And if you're not a member yet, we encourage you to check us out and find that community so that you could start to leverage the knowledge, power, and connections of this wonderful collaborative of women who really just choose to show up for themselves and for one another. We get to have great conversations like this in the Power Lounge, but we also have masterclasses, peer groups, and professional development opportunities. Cheryl, thank you again. It's been such a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate you. As soon as I saw you talking on stage, I was like, we have to have her in the Power Lounge. So here we are, months
Thank
later.
you. Yes,
So happy
yes.
to have you here with us and being able to introduce you to the community for those who couldn't attend. So
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
my pleasure. All right, everyone, that's all we've got for you today. We hope to see you again soon. Until next time, keep asking, keep giving, and keep growing. We'll see you soon.
Produced by Heartcast Media.